It's not your imagination. The sun really is brighter and hotter now than it used to be. That's what I'm talking about on this episode of the Driving with Rob podcast. I saw a TikTok video recently that said, is it my imagination or is the sun brighter than it used to be? Well, yeah, it is. And there's a reason for it, and I'll tell you why. The reason you wear sunblock, sunscreen, when you go out into the sun is to block the UV light from the sun. And if you're the type of person that is very fair-skinned or you burn easily, you want to make sure that you're wearing as much sunscreen as you can every time you go out in the sun. Well, the meteorologists and the TV news people have kind of glossed over this increased UV levels. They have mentioned it, but they haven't really gone into a great detail to tell you why. But what had happened was, about 2 weeks ago, there was a series of solar flares. And if you Google it, the scientists who study such things refer to this as a CME, coronal mass ejection. Basically what it is there's an explosion, an eruption on the surface of the sun. And when it erupts, it blows all of this extra elevated UV radiation directly at the Earth. So you have higher than normal UV levels. Some people call UV light solar radiation. So yeah, there really is an increased level this week and last week due to these coronal mass ejections, this eruption on the sun that is blasting all this extra solar radiation, this extra UV levels directly at Earth. But it happened about 2 weeks ago. And of course, they didn't talk about it then. It happened like the week after Memorial Day, 2025. Well, that solar radiation, this increased UV level, had to travel 93 million miles. So it took it about 2 weeks to get here. So yeah, right now, we have increased levels of UV light, solar radiation. The sun looks brighter. The sun is hotter. And personally, I think this is the reason that over the last week or so, we've been having unusual weather. Not crazy weather, but places that don't ordinarily get a lot of rainfall are getting like monsoon torrential rainfall. And we've been hearing these climate change people for years telling us that the sky is falling, that the global climate is changing, and it is changing because it always changes. But this week in particular, and last week, the sun is brighter and hotter as it strikes the Earth. They say that people have been able to see the aurora borealis, the northern lights, as far south as New York because of this increase in solar radiation. And the climate change people like to blame, or want to blame, human activity for climate change. And I have always believed and always said, of course, the climate's changing. I just don't believe human beings caused it. Because, in my opinion, only a far left liberal Democrat is arrogant enough to think human beings can actually change the global climate. But let me tell you what can. The sun. Solar flares. We can't stop them. And even with all the technology that we have available today, we can barely even predict it. But I really believe the weird weather that we've been having and the unusually bright sunlight and the unusually high temperatures in places that normally don't get really, really high temperatures is all due to these solar flares that happened 2 weeks ago. Now, the climate change people are always looking for somebody to blame. And personally, I believe the reason you haven't heard a lot of media coverage about these solar flares is because there's nobody you can blame for it. Eruptions on the sun. Democrats blame Trump. That's your typical news story. But these solar flares are pretty much completely unpredictable, and they can cause sudden cataclysmic climate change events. And we just had one about 2 weeks ago. Now, it's not a major solar flare event. 90% of the human population of Earth won't even notice. But pretty much everybody has noticed that the sun seems to be brighter. Because it is. And they said probably the most likely effects on human beings due to this solar flare that is just now hitting the Earth. Power grid problems. Disruptions in satellite communications, because, the satellites are outside the protective ozone layer. So they're taking the full brunt of this increase in solar radiation, and they said, it's possible while this event is going on, it's going to take a while for it to pass us, but it will eventually pass us. But your GPS may not work right. Or like it should, because it will interrupt satellite communications. And it can also cause problems with the power grid, because this solar radiation from the sun is carrying a lot of electromagnetic energy with it. And you're thinking like, okay, how does that affect me? Well, it's not going to have a lot of effect on you individually. But electromagnetism can cause tectonic plate shift. And when tectonic plate shift happens, then you have earthquakes. Volcanoes that haven't erupted in 200 years suddenly start erupting again. And I read somewhere that one volcanic eruption, like I think it was Mount St. Helens, threw up more greenhouse gas into the atmosphere in one day than all of the coal-fired power plants, automobiles, and aerosol cans since their invention. Mount St. Helens blew that much CO2 into the atmosphere in one day. And this is the reason I get so frustrated and irritated with these climate change people who are looking for somebody to blame for climate change, because they know it wasn't the Democrats. But anyway, I didn't mean for this to be a political statement, but it's true. They can't blame solar flares on anybody. Solar flares just happen, and they are so much more powerful than anything human beings could ever do or ever have done. And it just so happens that recently I was watching a documentary on the late Bronze Age that happened about 1200 BC, when major civilizations, people with an actual written language, people with, for the time, actual modern cities, vanished from the face of the earth within a 40 to 50 year time span. Some major cataclysmic event happened around 1200 BC. Did you know the Sahara Desert wasn't always a desert? The Sahara Desert is like the biggest desert on Earth. It pretty much takes all of northern Africa and pretty much extends all the way to the Middle East. That's why Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia are barren desert wastelands. Before 1200 BC, that wasn't the case. There were green and lush areas where people could grow crops and feed their livestock. And these major civilizations could grow up because of the abundance of everything. There were lakes and rivers and waterfalls and major cities in what is now the Sahara Desert before this cataclysmic event that brought an end to the Bronze Age. And the Bronze Age is just a title that archaeologists, scientists put on this time period of human civilization. But that whole fertile, abundant area became desert in geological terms overnight. Well, scientists have decided now that what happened was there was a slight wobble in the tilt of the Earth's axis. And it tilted it just enough that the monsoon rains stopped coming to the Sahara. And of all the civilizations that disappeared during that time period, Egypt was the only one that survived. And it's theorized that the reason Egypt survived is because they had the Nile River. And they were already using irrigation techniques to bring the Nile water out to their crops. So they were able to survive this cataclysmic thing that happened around 1200 BC. What is strong enough to cause the earth to wobble? It's not aerosol cans. It's not automobile exhaust. It's not coal-fired power plant smokestacks. What can hit the earth so hard that it can change the tilt of the earth's axis? My theory is that it was a gigantic solar flare. 1200 BC, nobody had telescopes. A lot of civilizations still believed that the earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around the earth. They didn't have any idea. They had no way to speculate what caused this cataclysmic event. But around 1200 BC, there were people who remembered when the Sahara had lakes and rivers and waterfalls and abundant grassland and grazing land for animals. And now it's a desert. They told their grandchildren about what the Sahara used to look like. They told their grandchildren what Saudi Arabia used to look like and what Iran and Iraq used to look like, because it happened during their lifetime. A cataclysmic event that happened suddenly that human beings had no control over, and human beings at that time couldn't even speculate what caused it. I believe it was a major solar flare, because once all that electromagnetic energy hit the earth, I believe it tilted the earth just enough that it changed the climate all over the earth. So what we're experiencing right now with the high UV levels, higher than normal UV levels, with the potential to disrupt satellite communication, with the potential to disrupt the power grid, is all the result of a small solar event. But they say it may take about another month for the effects of these latest solar flares to pass the Earth, next stop Mars. But what if another one happens? We can't stop it. We can't predict it. It could throw us into a nuclear winter, because when all this electromagnetic energy hits and starts causing volcanoes, all the dust and ash goes up into the atmosphere and blocks the sun. We might head into another ice age. Or it may just raise the Earth's temperature so much the other areas become desert. We don't know. Nobody knows. But yeah, if you notice how bright it is outside, it is brighter than normal. And if you get sunburned easily, you need to put on extra sunblock, because it's a real thing. The UV levels are extremely high right now, and this is a small solar event. Solar flares and climate change. Like I said up front, I don't believe human beings have the power to change the climate of the Earth. They can maybe change a local area, pollute Los Angeles, pollute New York City, but they can't change the Earth's climate. But the sun can. But anyway, thank you for downloading. Thank you for listening to the podcast. You can find the Driving with Rob podcast anywhere you go to listen to podcasts. I'm on Google Podcast. I'm on Apple. I'm on Spotify. Just type in the Driving with Rob podcast and you'll find it. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you next time. Bye now.